Hello, welcome to the Crackpot Podcast.
A beautiful day to start up a revolution. Molotov cocktails, martini shotgun shells. Wild, 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 wild one. God forbid the cops get called. I say the more the merrier inside this free. See it all. I got front row tickets to the greatest show of all.
Welcome to episode 65 of the Crackpot Podcast with LaFond and Lockhart, and today we have a special guest, sometimes known as Ishmael.
Moby Dick was one of my favorite books, so that's where I kind of got that moniker from.
Yeah, it's a good one. Thanks for joining us. Should we try to call you Ishmael? I guess we'll try. I'll fail, though.
Feel free to call me what you will.
All right. Well, it's Bob in Utah, and James is stationed there very comfortably, and I'm always happy when James is in Utah. So we were warming up, and we were talking about hunting. I had been listening to a fellow that Bob recommended called Steve Rinella, and he has his own podcast, and he's also been on Joe Rogan's podcast a few times. And so there's an episode of Steve Rinella's podcast called Meat Eater, where they interviewed an archaeologist who specializes in North and South American sites, digs, and also, of course, naturally, the animals, because those early human sites were all about hunting. And we know that North and South America experienced this really huge and varied extinction of a lot of the megafauna, but I learned from that podcast that it wasn't just megafauna, it was big and small animals. So we're talking about that, and we're talking about hunting. So I think that's probably going to be the big theme for today, but we'll see what else we can cover. So Bob, you're the star of the show because you are the hunter.
Somewhere in there in the middle, yeah.
So let's talk about that as a hunter, how you follow animals. You were telling us about, well, the idea that I liked was the idea that humans arrived into North America and South America and just went on a rampage and killed every tasty animal and just killed and ate everything. But apparently this is not really what happened. And so as a hunter, Bob, you kind of rejected that. Right? Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah. That theory, remember that theory was, the archaeologists had probably never hunted, if he hunted, he hadn't hunted much. I bet he wasn't ever a subsistence hunter. How could he know what the mindset of somebody like that was? And how they address that way of survival. So yeah, me too. I always ask a lot of questions. I'm skeptical and paranoid and all rolled into one. Yeah, I'm always looking for answers, always questioning things.
So tell us first of all, I want you to tell me what it takes to get a buffalo tag, because I know that this is something you had waited for in your life for years and years. So explain, you live in Utah, so how does it work to hunt buffalo?
We have a wild herd down in the southern, that'd be the southeastern corner of Utah. And it's at one time it was the only wild herd there was other than Yellowstone, if I remember the information. Anyway, it's a once in a lifetime draw. You can hunt buffalo on Antelope Island and other places, but you have to have a lot of money to do it. You know, I've known guys paying $20,000 to hunt, so I can't. That puts me way out, so I have to put into the draw. But yeah, it's once in a lifetime. I've been putting in for 15 years before I drew out.
Wow. What was the first phone call, or what's the first thing you do did you get a letter, or did they call you? How do you know you got the draw?
You get a letter, and I got an email that I drew out and what hunt it was, and do you want to turn your tag in? This is one of the last hunts of the year. The buffalo have been chased everywhere, and they said this is not a good time to have a tag. 10% of the people is all that will get a buffalo on this last hunt, because we've been hunting them since October. My hunt started, I think, December 18th. I was already up against it. The whole herd was spooked by the time I got there.
So by the time they select you, you don't get a choice of when to go. You have to abide by this time slot. And
Yeah.
if you get an animal or you don't, that's it. That was your
That's
chance.
it. Yeah. You turn your tag in if you don't feel good about it, or that's it. Yeah. You draw out.
So you decided to give it a shot.
Yeah, I started right away. I started thinking of young people, because wished I drew out when I was in my 40s, but unfortunately I was in my middle or late 50s when I drew out. So started thinking about kids and resources. The first thing I did, how to get it out if I happen to get one. And well, I planned way ahead. I was already thinking way ahead. I think they'd let me know in September, October, so it gave me 2 months to plan for what I was going to do.
So when you draw that tag, do you get to bring your entourage? How many people you think are gonna? It's just that what's restricted is that you can only take one animal. Is that correct?
And really, you only have one person that really can be armed to kill.
Really?
Yeah. And I don't know. I know some. You know, I never read the regulations, but we took a 14-year-old friend of mine, a kid that I've dealt with a lot and hunted with, and I let him carry the spare rifle if mine had problems, which it did. It was quite funny. We were glassing for buffalo, and when we first started that morning, and the strap that was holding my rifle, the scabbard, broke. I didn't know it at the time, and it was real windy, and the horses were fidgety. And I just happened to look over. We've been looking for 10 minutes, 15, 20, something like that. I lose track when you're concentrating. But I looked over, and a horse was standing on my rifle. It broke. The scabbard broke and dropped the rifle in the ground, and the horse stepped on it.
Oh man.
And left it. It was one spot and left a hoof print. But it was luckily in the butt. It wasn't on the forearm or anywhere. They mostly stepped on the end. So what I did, we picked out a rock, even though it was really windy, and I picked out a rock size of a basketball about 100 yards. And I knew the wind. You know, we've shot enough. We know with the way the wind was blowing, it's going to blow my bullet off a good, minimum 12 inches. It was a gale wind. We were getting a storm moving in, and I bet we had 50 mile an hour winds. So what I did, I held about 8 inches, I can't remember, to the left or the right of the target, and pulled the trigger, and it managed to hit that rock. So I thought, well, it's still, hopefully it's still, sighted in.
You sighted your rifle after a horse stepped on it in the field.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure.
Felt pretty good about it. So how many were in your group? How many men? How many horses?
And with the mounted horses, there was 6 of us that are mounted, and then we brought 6 pack horses, so that would be 12. It was 12. Wow. 12 animals. It took 6 horses to pack all of the buffalo out.
Wow. That's just a huge mobilization to take one buffalo, right?
Yeah, I'd cut up the moose here a little smaller than the Canadian moose. The moose here usually don't get much more than 1,000 pounds. But I've dealt with moose, elk, deer, and I can honestly say that was if I had to do that, I could have done it, but I'd had to probably have left the animal up there overnight or stay with the animal and come back the next day. It'd take me 4 or 5 trips myself.
Wow.
Pack horse. even when I was young, it been hard to get everything out and not have it free and not have it spoiled. But of course, December 18th, we didn't have to worry about that.
So when you see that you're in December, you know that the weather's going to be rough, and then as it gets closer, you start looking at the forecasts, and did you realize that it was going to be such a windy and stormy time out there?
We knew that we was getting it's time for storm, but we wasn't ready for the wind. And that wind was, I've never seen anything like it. The one night, my son-in-law actually went and hitched his trailer up to his truck, so then we thought it was going to blow it over.
Wow.
It was like flexing, though. You could hear the windows flex in the trailer when the wind had blown so hard. So yeah, and it stayed like that for a couple of days because we knew something was coming, and it eventually did make it. Like I think I killed the buffalo on the second or third day. Probably the third day. We've been glassing, we hadn't seen anything, and the weather was getting so bad, and we were in far enough off the road with no asphalt that if we got a storm, we were going to have to sit there for a few days to dry it out until we could get out. Because that southern Utah clay, it's just nasty to try.
Oh, it gets sticky.
Yes, very sticky, very slick.
Wow.
And glassing is your term for using binoculars.
Yeah, we glassed like crazy, and we do more of that because they were spooked enough. We wanted that if the animal's that spooked, you have to go in real quiet and you glass a lot, and you try not to interfere with them anymore, and then try to find out where they are. That's where they're at. That's the first thing I always do.
So what is the landscape there where you were hunting? Is that plains? Is there scrub or forest or what?
If anybody wants to look, the Henry Mountains, it's just like a mountain range that pops right out of the middle of the desert. So it goes from, like most Utah mountains, it goes from juniper, scrub oak, mixed pine with aspen. Then at the top, you get mostly the Engelmann and the alpine spruce top. So it's just a layered environment as far as the food source goes. And the bottom part of like the junipers, in the thick of the junipers, there's not a lot of feed. So what they do is the buffalo usually start just like the elk do on the lowest stuff they can get to and move on up as the season progresses. And there's not a lot of, it's a big area, but there's more feed in the mid ranges probably than there is anywhere. So they usually eat off the bottom part of their feed fairly fast. They're probably starting up into the mountains, I would guess in June, but I never got a chance to follow them. But I remember while we were riding through the mid-range area of the mountain before we got there, I seen a lot of places where the buffalo had been dusting. They used to call them buffalo wallows, but they're dust. They deal with the flies and the parasites on them. They're all like that. And I seen a bunch of places that were just loaded with them. So I knew they were spending the summer at higher altitude right then.
Do they eat the same thing as the elk?
They're a grazer. They eat similar to an elk. Elk will do browse, but moose and deer are more browsers.
So what's the difference between grazing and browsing?
You eat more grass when you're grazing.
Does browsing mean eat from the tree leaves?
Yeah, they eat the tips of the new shoots coming on they eat a lot of the young shoots. I've always known they like my wife's flowers, so they'll eat the tops of the flowers. So they like, up in the mountains, probably do the same thing. But they do it selectively. They don't do it. It's just almost like their body knows exactly what they need.
So all those rose hips that look like they've been browsed on, that's probably deer.
Yeah, I showed him some rose hips and they've been browsed on. I'll bet money on it with deer. And then where you get moose, if you got willow, you'll have moose. Moose really like the willows. Up here, all you gotta do is find an area with a lot of willows and they'll be moose.
So they're browsers too.
They're browsers like a deer.
All right, so you're in an area of mountains, which it seems like the visibility would not be very good then, but you still can use your binoculars to look for signs and look for animals.
Well, Eastern standards, yes, but Western standards, even in the high mountains, you'll have big meadows and long-range shooting. One of the biggest problems when I was a guide is a lot of the guys come from Pennsylvania, Southern Carolina, anywhere it was very, very timbered. They'd freak out if they had to shoot past 100 yards because they'd never looked at those distances, a lot of them. And we're used to shooting out 300-400 yards. So that was the first thing I dealt with.
When we were up outside of Cody, Wyoming, Shane was testing my ability to gauge distances, and I'd literally never seen anything on a level vision field that was farther away than a block. I couldn't tell if something was 200 yards or 300 yards.
I'm sure I can't. Yeah.
We call bore sighting in areas we hunted year after year after year with bore sight. What we do, that's what we called it. It's probably not the right thing, but we'd find a target from our position where we hunted a lot, and we'd shoot and hit a target that we had no idea. We knew how close it was to an estimate, and then we would take I had a 300-foot tape, and so we would tape to that rock or that target we'd shot out, and we'd get the exact distance. So what we were training ourselves to be able to recognize the yardage and be more effective hunters. Me and Shane did that a lot. So we'd bore sight the side hills. We knew right where we were going to shoot. And it helped a lot when I was a guide in Wyoming, because a lot of those places we'd hunt, they really wouldn't. I doubt they'd see a hunter a year in there. It was that remote.
So tell us a little bit about guiding. What kind of animals did you guide for hunting?
I guided elk, moose, and antelope, deer. Mostly the deer and the elk. I hunted most of the time I was up high. And we have a base camp where you have a lot of you can usually get to that with a pickup truck or four-wheel drive. And then we have what they call a spike camp. The only way you can get to a spike camp is with horses. And that's all I ever worked. I never worked the base camp. I was always spiking out with the young guys. I was a younger man then too. I started doing that when I was like 28, I think.
So what's the spike camp look like? How's it set up?
Since we have horses, we're not backpackers. We can haul in lumber. We can haul in stoves. We can haul in propane tanks. One area I hunted with was no motor whatsoever. So you can't have a chainsaw. So you have to cut all your timber with a whip saw and buck it up on, just like they used to 100 years ago before they had chainsaws. And this area, we could have a chainsaw. It just depended on where you were. But if it was luxurious, if we had a place where we didn't have to worry about chainsaws, like it was usually the public lands, that would be the forest. It wouldn't be anything designated wilderness. And so we could take in what we wanted. As far as we took generators in.
So what do the horses eat? Can the horses just go and find their own grass, or how do you manage that?
We haul in feed because a lot of times we had to, on that lower ground, it was grazed by cattle. The guys had permits up there, so there was some feed, but that's the reason we had to pack our own, because there wasn't enough grazing pasture left for the horses. So yeah, we'd bring in our own, but we'd also turn some loose when we were there earlier. But yeah, we corralled them in the fall. We'd have maybe one or two horses we could trust, and we just let them run free at night. They just wander around all night.
How many horses to a man?
Our hunters, we try to get the hunter to keep the same horse and not soar them up. A guide has to switch out two horses, pluses, and I have two horses in a pack, or one horse in a pack. And I would usually, if I had a horse, most of the horses are broke to ride and pack. They're multi-purpose, and we would drag our own mount with us. I know the Indians did the same thing. We just have a halter, and if we did, once they get tired, we just switch the pack out with the saddle and switch animals. And that's because the guides would travel 2 or 3 times more than the hunters ever did, trying to do, we called it recon, finding animals. And sometimes when we got desperate, we'd drive them. We never liked to drive the area for animals because it runs them out. But once in a while, we'd have to ride and do a drive, and that amounts to a lot more riding for me than the guys that are waiting on the stands to shoot.
How many men would be at the spike camp?
They'd have usually one guide with 200 to 400 hunters. I usually had an average of 300 to 400. If you had a specialty hunt and the guy paid $500 extra and he was on what they call a trophy hunt, then you had one guide, one hunter. But you had to pay extra to do that.
How many men would be in the camp, in the spike camp?
Four guides and 10 hunters sometimes 12. 10 to 12, 3 to 4 guides.
So you've got 30 horses.
Yeah, we had 30, 40 horses in corrals. We'd haul in the black hose that you can string out, and so we'd dam off a little part of the spring and run the hose down into the downhill into the corral, and so we had running water into the corral.
What about dogs?
The only time we carried dogs when we were in grizzly country. A dog's a must when you're in there. But where we were, sometimes we'd have a dog, sometimes we wouldn't.
Why is the dog a must when there's grizzlies?
They don't like bears. They'll let them up, and they got better senses than we do, and so we'd usually look. When we'd ride back in here, you'd notice most of the dogs they have back in there healers, something really aggressive. They'd have a real aggressive animal and take in with them just so they could, let them know the bears were getting close.
So the dog warns you. Do you think the dog warns the bear at all, or like bears can notice them too, or they probably notice all of you guys?
The dogs made me sleep better at night. They just let me know because they know when something's getting close. We never had a problem with being alarmed, being known that there was a bear in the area when we had those dogs. I slept really good up in the wilderness when we had dogs. Didn't worry about it. But
so what kind of stuff would bears do that would interfere with your hunt or camping or anything?
In the wilderness, we still can't. They're still fighting over whether to delist the grizzly and hunt them. And so the grizzlies have absolutely no respect for somebody. They don't shoot us and they don't harm us. We're not scared of you. So they're real aggressive. They can get real aggressive back in the wilderness.
And what kind of stuff will they do? I know when I was up here last time, a guy got killed.
Yeah, one of the worst things is having a dead animal on the ground, an elk, and all you do is you try to gut it, quarter it up, and get it out as fast as you can before a bear claims it. Because that time of year, they're hungry, they're getting ready to go hibernate, and they're looking for all the food they can get into their system.
So if you just take the quarters and leave the rest, he'll feed on that.
Yeah, we'd leave the gut pile, and it depends on if the hunter wanted to take the ribs, we take the ribs. Well, in Wyoming, we could what we call end dress them and strip the loins, and we strip the neck, and we just leave the rib cage and the gut pile for the grizz. But we were careful with that too, because there was enough food for them to claim. They'll hang out on that kill, and you ride close to it within yards that enough area they can sense you. They'll attack and give you a bad time. They'll try to run you off the kill they've claimed.
What kind of nuisance around camp would they call?
We have special Forest Service has hauled in special containers they use for anybody that comes in, and they're locked containers. They look kind of like try to picture a large rectangular coffin. And they don't have any places on them. They're smooth on the outside, with the exception of the hasp and the padlock you put on them, for them to get anywhere where they can grip or get an edge or anything that they can pull apart. Because once they will get an edge and they can get their paws under it and start pulling, they can get into about anything. I've seen them. We had a little older, it was probably at the time 30-year-old horse trailer, probably built in the 50s. And we were in a hurry, and me and the guy I worked for, we unloaded the groceries. We went to Jackson, got a bunch of groceries. He unloaded them and put them in this horse trailer, thinking nothing of it because we're going to be back for nighttime anyway with another load. But when we got back, it still wasn't dark up there, but we found a grizzly had ripped the back end of that horse trailer right off. I mean, he got a hold of it. It wasn't padlocked, but he was able to get past the hinges and everything and just tear the back end of that horse trailer off and get to the food.
So your spike camp is what, tents?
Tents.
Okay, you all set up tents, and
it's a dirt floor. If, like I said, if we had the luxury and the Forest Service let us, we had to pack generators in. We packed lumber in and have a wood floor. But wilderness, it was dirt floor and just tents. That was it.
Okay, so what kind of security would you have in the spike camp against these bears?
We had what they call the cattlemen out there know what I'm talking about. It's called a solar bull. Is one of the names up here. It's a solar panel that you run with a couple of marine batteries, deep cycle batteries, and you'd run an electric fencing around the perimeter to protect yourself from the bears at night because they prowl a lot. They're always looking for food. The rule was we locked like those lock boxes I was talking about. The rule was you put all the food in there. You didn't even leave a candy bar in your saddlebags. We used to go through the saddlebags in case the hunters didn't pay attention and miss us, so they couldn't smell anything in those saddlebags. So yeah, they had a really extreme sense of smell. And you'd go out, we bring the animals in every night with inside some we could run, but we'd bring some of the animals inside with us at night so we could round the horses up in the morning because they were all running loose. And, they would, so the trail, any of the area around us on the trails would be dusty and packed down. So if anything moved across those tracks, those horse hooves in the middle of the night, you knew we'd had visitors. And I can't remember a day, especially when we were elk hunting, when I'd go out or anybody would leave and you could go out and look at the pass and you'd see a grizzly track practically every time you were out there. And he'd walk the perimeter looking for a place in.
Now, what about the latrines? Where would the latrines be set up?
When we run the fish camp, we get far away from the course where we're eating and sleeping as we could. But what we would do, we take if anybody's been to Utah, they know there's a guy here, Ken Kirkham guy, and he makes these spring bar tents. He was a guy originally, I guess, come up with them. And that's what we'd use for the latrine. We'd do a spring bar tent. And we would hand dig a latrine, just like the old outhouses was. And that's basically what it was. It was an outhouse. Other than that, it was wood. We had a tent over it. And then we had to cover that latrine up when we left and leave like I said, you leave it like you found it. So. And,
any problems with the bears?
Yeah, that was always a joke amongst us. I remember one time we'd been up, had a camp and we moved it and, we rode back in 2 weeks later we were resupplying it. And the first latrine, we happened to ride over and look around there and the bear dug up all the contents of the latrine and was eating it. They do the same thing on our fish camps. We have the dogs on the fish camps and generally we don't even put up a fence in June because the bears aren't as aggressive for some reason. So if we're on a fish camp, which they say they start probably in the middle of June, we just have the dogs at night. So the latrine would be the same thing, but we'd always have trouble. We had trouble the last year I was up there, the bear would come in the latrine every night and tear it to pieces before the dogs would finally run him off.
So you don't want to be going outside the perimeter at night.
No, it does make you a little nervous.
Okay, so you discussed with me the mistakes that were made with the bow hunting guy that got killed by the bear last year. But what would you personally do to protect yourself against the bear in case the worst thing happened?
But pistols, I never carried a pistol. I didn't have no use for them. They're too small. I'd carry the story I told James. I said I'd carry a 9mm when it grabbed me by the leg and drug me out. Hopefully I could stick it in his ear and pull the trigger. That's the only thing that 9mm was good for. But I carried the heaviest ordnance I could. And I was usually a sawed-off shotgun, 20-inch barrel, full choke, and we'd shoot. We call them pumpkin balls, but there's probably 8 or 9 9mm slugs behind a real heavy charge of powder, and that was used at very close range. They're very effective. They will kill a bear at close range.
What makes a grizzly bear so hard to kill? Why is it that one animal that you just think you need the biggest gun or the heaviest ammunition. What is it? He has a thick skull. What else? Tell me why.
No, I think it was the will to live. I always told James, they aren't tough like any animal. A black bear will pack a lot of lead, but a grizzly has, if you want to, you football guys out there, he has a linebacker's attitude. It's the shitbird. You want the shitbird of the group to be the linebacker. When I was in school, the linebackers all had it. So, yeah, that's where the grizzly bear is. That's one reason I think they're so hard to kill.
They're hyper aggressive compared to.
They are compared to a black bear. And black bears, don't get me wrong, they can cause you problems. But as far as being aggressive, grizzly bears are the worst. And the statistics will tell you that black bear are more common than attacks. Well, God, that's a no-brainer. How many grizzlies are there compared to black bear? That's a stupid way to figure that.
Black bears in the suburbs back east.
That's like the FBI crime statistics. Well, my friend in Montana had to kill a black bear in his backyard. It was coming around often, and finally he didn't want it coming around anymore.
To give you an idea, if you have a lot of grizzlies in an area, if you have black bears, they'll be big males because the grizzlies eat the black bear. They don't want them for competition. They kill them.
Wow.
So that's a fact in there. If there's a lot of grizzlies, they eat the black bear. They run them out.
Okay, so it's the same thing that MS-13 does to African American gangs.
That's right. Yeah. Hispanic guys are way tougher than those guys in the long run.
What are the rules as far as defending yourself against one of these things? And also with wolves too, if you're going to end up talking about wolves.
If you reported, but back in the years when I was in there in the 90s, if you reported that you killed a bear, it was almost like you had murdered somebody. The Forest Service would put you in rooms. They would interview you individually. They'd do you as a pair or whoever witnessed the killing. And it was just like being interviewed if somebody had been murdered or shot in self-defense. That was probably like if you was being interviewed after you shot somebody in self-defense. It's ridiculous, but that's the rule. That's the way the Forest Service was. So everybody, a lot of times, of course, it makes some outfitters, they're not going to report it. They don't want to go through that, and they know it was legitimate in their head, so they're not going to say nothing. And sometimes, I can say for a fact, I know sometimes they killed it. They killed them because they hung around the camp too much. You just, it's a joke and it's an old cliche saying, but it's, you practice the 3 S's: shoot, shovel, and shut up.
So, what kind of reaction first this animal, and maybe you can talk about other ones. What kind of reaction does a grizzly bear have to you firing a weapon, perhaps on another animal?
In the wilderness where they're not hunted and they're not afraid of you, like they relate a sound of a rifle as a dinner bell. They know there's animal down. They know there might be some free food, so they'll come towards how's that? They'll come towards the shop if they're in the area.
Now, are they the only animals that behave like that?
Yeah, then the ravens. And the ravens, they get to pick up what the grizzlies don't care. But yeah, the ravens, they're a very intelligent bird. They know where the food is. Same way, that'll have to be the two things: magpies, ravens, and grizzly. Be the first thing to find them.
So what about wolves? I got a picture from a reader that was on a hunt with this guy that looked like he was about your son size, holding up this wolf. That looked like the biggest German shepherd on the planet.
That was actually one of the guides that the kids, the grandsons that preceded some of the guides up there. That guy that owns the camp, he's got a grandson that guides for him, and it had trouble with a pack of wolves getting into the horses at night, and so they eliminated one night. And the kid I told James when he sent him the message, that kid's 5'10", to give you an idea. And I don't know if did I send you the picture of that wolf?
That wolf was as tall as he was.
That kid's 5'10". He looks shorter, but he's 5'9", 5'10", I'll tell you that.
So how much for that wolf was?
That wolf was 150 pounds, we figured. And it had feet on it the size of a bear. I mean, a small black bear, they're Canadian timber wolves. They're not, that's one thing that I question. just like the moose and everything was a little different, a little bigger the further north. I don't think the wolves here originally were probably as big as the wolves in the north, but I don't know because, they wiped them out. Who knows? But they reintroduced Canadian timber wolves. They're large animals.
Well, they were thrill killing elk herds up in Oregon, right?
Yeah, they've thrill killed. They'll do it. Just like they're enjoying it, just like young men do sometimes when they get carried away. I was always, my dad was the same way with the coyotes. He said, they'd go through a herd of sheep and they'd kill more than they needed. It had nothing to do. He said, they just get in there and I think they'd get excited. It was too easy. He said, I don't know. But he says, yeah, they throw kill, do the same thing. You just got to witness it. A lot of those biologists, all they do is follow the bears down around in their habitat. I'll bet they never follow them around when people were hunting in there and chasing them around. I always wondered if they did any, that their data there when that was happening, where the herdsmen were in there, did they hang around a herd of sheep or a herd of cattle to see what they were doing? I don't know. I always wondered about that. So if they just found an isolated, amount of bears and just concentrated on the few instead of doing giving it every angle you can to find the truth, find out what's going on.
You had a conversation with your friend the other day about white-tailed deer coming in.
Yeah.
What's that about? And what's the difference between these two deer?
The Utah feeling about whitetails, eliminate them. They call them rats with hooves.
They call them that in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they can survive better than the mule deer here. But they also, one of the things that I think is no big deal is they usually like the lowlands. They don't like high country. And so a lot of the places they're coming in is lower areas. In Logan, we have here north of us, there's Logan, it's in Cache County. And that's where they start coming in. And right now they say they probably have a population of 2,000 there, so they've just given up trying to stop them there. But here, if they start seeing whitetail, you can shoot them, and they'll give you a permit to make sure it's tagged, but you can shoot them and eat them as many as you want, as many tags as you can get for them. So they don't want them started here.
Is that good food?
Yeah, I've ate whitetail. I ate some of that whitetail out of Nebraska, and it was delicious. I thought it was.
How's it compare to mule deer?
Mule deer is it's like the bear. It depends on what they're eating. When we bow hunted and those deer had been in them alfalfa fields, what they do is they just eat the top out of the new growth of the alfalfa. They wouldn't take it all the way to the ground. And they were eating the nice succulent stuff. And once they started on the browse and the harder feed, the meat had changed, the flavor of it. But if you shoot an animal off the alfalfa, they were delicious. They tasted totally different than an animal you may kill in November in this area. But the whitetail, that's the thing that's nice about all those areas. They're in agricultural areas all their life. So they probably get some pretty good food compared to
they're eating like lawn grass, right?
Yeah.
And rose shoots. I ate some mountain lion over the summer.
But we're also doing the same thing. When I was a kid, if a deer trespassed into your yard, he just disappeared. But now they've got the people moving in. We got a lot of liberals moving in from California. Park City's just to the west of us is just like a big nest of them. And
you got an infestation.
We've got so they actually feed deer. So they come in, they eat your gardens, they eat your flowers. James is seeing them when he's here. I had a nice buck laying in my wife's garden last year.
Yeah, I wanted to try to kill it with a bat.
I do kind of the same thing. In the back of my mind, my wife used to get really irritated with me. But when I'd see him, I'd say, man, I wonder how that's going to taste on the barbie. It's like we'd be watching a National Geographic, about the beautiful animals in Africa. And me and Shane give us our attitude. We look at them and say, I wonder if they taste good when you grill them, That's how we look.
How's your mountain lion? How was your mountain lion?
The mountain lion was really lean. It didn't really taste much different from beef, I thought, but it was just really, really lean. And my girls really loved it. They tasted it and they thought it was great. It was just they had just fried it in a pan, and the girls ended up finishing it. But it was interesting. But I was gonna say, that my Chinese friend told me that that's what Chinese people say when they're in the aquarium. Like you go to the aquarium and look at all the beautiful fish, and Chinese person says, "Oh, I wonder how that tastes. I wonder if that's good to eat."
Well,
So, like you guys, when I see animals out and about, like at the parks around here where there are a lot of geese, Canada geese that stay all year long, and I just think, that's good. Just let them be there because we might need them someday. So,
and that's the main reason here. I could eliminate them. It'd be no problem for me to, sneak out there and head shoot one. Nobody'd hear much of it because I got neighbors that wouldn't say anything. But I'm the same way. I'm thinking I better leave them alone. I might. You never know. That might be what you're relying on someday.
well, that's what we were talking about in the warm up. You were saying that the Indian practice would have been to hike at least a minimum distance before they started hunting, so to sort of preserve like what's close by to the village in case of famine. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I wish I could cite which book I read that in, which history book, but that was one of the things that the guy said he noticed. He says they would leave the animals alone, especially the guys up in the north, the Eskimos. If they were in an area where they had animals year round, they would, or the Indians in the southern areas before you get into the United States, they'd leave the animals alone that were close. They were saved for when you were starving and weak. They'd go out 15 miles before I don't know, they had a distance 10 to 15 miles before they'd start hunting. They left the animals close to them alone.
Well, that's a good idea. I've done a lot of reading on mass extinctions and particularly what the Romans did as far as like large populations of a large variety of large animals being eliminated from an area. It's easy to kill an animal like a dodo bird. A couple of sailors could get on that island and just wipe them out because they got nowhere to go. But continent-wide extinctions of multiple large animals are actually pretty rare. In Australia, when you had the lowest IQ humans on the planet immigrate into an area where these marsupials lived who had never seen humans and are probably the lowest IQ animals on the planet, then you just had a big slaughter. A whole lot of them got wiped out, and there wasn't any real attempt to conserve them. The Romans did purposeful mass extinctions. They managed it everywhere they could because it was part of the Roman power structure to demonstrate dominance over the entire world, which included the animal kingdom, and things like lions, bears, leopards, and tigers were greatly feared by country people. And you had lions in Europe coexisting with the Greek civilization all along. But the Romans did everything they could to eradicate them, not to wipe them out, but a quest for a constant large supply of animals to slaughter in these public arenas so that people would feel like they were safe in the countryside. So by the time you hit the peak empire around 200 AD, they're getting lions from sub-Sahara Africa. They're getting tigers from India because they wiped out the Caspanian tiger. They wiped out the European lion, the North African lion. So this is really, it's not a modern way of thinking, but you have a couple parallel ways of thinking, that come out of the Roman Empire. And this is carried over to people think that just European people just have to wipe animals out. But that's not the way European people behaved before the Romans. The Romans pretty much pioneered this. Even the Persians, they didn't try to wipe out lions and tigers. Only the king could hunt these things. But the Romans take it to a whole different level. They want the society to see the king sanctioning a mass hunt of these animals.
And Romans are also good at that kind of thing. They're good at big projects, right?
Yes. This was industrial level,
yeah.
civic hunts of animals that had been gathered from around the world, and it expanded to their dietary habits. And in ancient Rome, the elite, they ate mammals and birds and fish from as far away as they could be gotten. In a similar way to, your hipsters all having to eat sushi now. It's the same type of thing, or having to eat emo, or eating kiwis from the supermarket, and anything to this like elite mentality that comes from farthest away is more delicious socially. And what happens in Europe is what carried on this Roman tradition of exterminating the animals was really the Middle Eastern idea that was embedded in Christianity, that the forest was the enemy of the people, and the forest was actually where the devil and his minions lived. And that comes from a herding mentality, as far as I can tell. It goes all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the forest was the place where the enemy lived. So it's probably a really deep Aryan tradition that comes from the steppes, where the forest was feared. It might go all the way back for fear of the Neanderthals, because what you can see archaeologically now is that modern Homo sapiens failed to penetrate Europe significantly against Neanderthal opposition for over 100,000 years.
It was basically, my theory is that it wasn't until they had picked up enough Neanderthal genes from the skirmishes and, raiding the women or whatever, they had picked up enough genes into the modern human genome, then that's what really made the modern human more effective.
And keeping in mind that all the Neanderthal genes are patrilineal, so that was Neanderthal on frail Homo sapien rape situation. And the people actually decided not to euthanize these babies, these mixed race babies. So that's pretty fascinating, that when the enemy, which is considered like a monster from the woods, is raping your women, you're still allowing these children to live. Early Americans did the same thing with half-breed children. They didn't mind having half-breed Indian children because they would be used as guides to go against the native population, and even as diplomats. You see that in all these abduction narratives that you've been sending me. And so what you have in North America that makes the Europeans look like they're these evil eradication specialists of animals, it was not ethnic, it was religious. It was comes from the book of Genesis, and Thomas White points this out in the Planter's Plea. The whole idea of the plantation was to establish a colony of people to eradicate the native forest and turn it into either a garden or a grazing land.
And also another thing, first thing I noticed in a civilization where you're raising grain, animals, husbandry, anything like that, it gets to a point where kids are a hindrance instead of a treasure. In a hunter society, I think that might be one reason they allowed them to live in a hunter-gatherer society. Children are treasures. They are not something that are a burden or a pain or something that's cramping your style. They are your future, and they're the ones that's going to be hunting for you when you're old and can't do it anymore. So they were, like I said, you've noticed children in a hunter society were treasures. They were treasures.
I think the children in that subsistence farming are cheap. More, not necessarily burdens, or sometimes they are, but I remember I saw a story of a doctor who, a man, I think he was in the Air Force, and he was a doctor in Afghanistan. I might be saying that wrong, but he's told a story of a man in Afghanistan who owned a tractor, and the tractor was so precious to him, and he was farming land that had been mined, I don't know, by the Russians or the Afghans, or I don't know who mined it, but he would have his children walk before his tractor so that they would trip any mines and preserve the tractor.
Any English patriarch in New England from 300 years ago would be in absolute concord with that Afghan, okay, as far as what they thought about their children. Because for one thing, they had, as soon as you do forced midwifery, where you have a poor girl that's forced to nurse the matriarch's children, then she can kick out a dozen kids. And you get a large surplus of children that are dispensable. And the people that are living at a subsistence level, when they lose a child or a man or a woman, it's a disaster. They'll immediately go out there and try to kidnap somebody that's close to puberty so that they're still impressionable, they can adopt them, they can indoctrinate them into their way of life, and then they're going to be an adult in just a couple of years, and they're going to be able to participate. So it's a very different way of looking at the world.
And there was a book, I don't know if I sent it to you or not. It's Farley Mullet. It's People of the Deer. Did I send that to you?
I have that.
Okay, I sent it to James. If you look inside that, the only time that children were allowed, where children would actually die of starvation, is that they looked at it realistically. As long as there was food, the male and the female that were reproducing, just like a wolf pack, are the only ones that can create new children. That's where you're going to get your children from. So, last ditch effort, when you were starving, and they did get in those situations. That was the only time I've ever noticed that people actually allowed their kids to starve to death, just for the reason being, if good times comes again, they can have more children. But if the guys that are hunting and taking care of the village, if they're gone, there's no existence after that. There's nobody around.
And it's part of the normal dining practices.
Well, I read in Jack London, and this is fiction, so I don't know, but he spent time up there in the Yukon and stuff, and he wrote that for the ice people, the Eskimos or whatever you want to call them, if a man died, then his wife was expected to kill children under age 3 because they just wouldn't be provided for. So it was just the way it is. I mean, that's where life is really on the razor's edge. And that age of 3 to 4 is really when a kid can start keeping up with the family and doing chores and stuff. So, it makes sense, but that's life on the edge.
Well, that's fascinating. So that's taking that hunter-gatherer culture and putting it under the highest stress levels.
And their mindset. That's like it goes back to when I was talking about a guy with a college professor that studied archaeology. That's fine with what you find physically, but you will never be able to know what those people are thinking mentally. The only way you can do is, like these guys that went out and talked to the primitive tribes and try to, find out how they thought. We didn't do a lot of that. We just pushed west and tried to annihilate them. We didn't want to learn anything about them. But there was enough guys out there who was curious about it. And that's the reason that stuff survived, is they were curious enough to find out how those people thought and how those people lived. Yeah, most of the time they just want to annihilate them and take over their property.
So as a hunter, Bob, when you would read this theory that humans arrived in North America and just started feasting on these massive, elephant woolly mammoths and cave bears and giant sloths. I saw a skeleton of the giant ground sloth. I mean, that thing, the femur on that thing is like 4x4. It's huge.
Well, the people at that tech level and at that population density wouldn't have the ability to eradicate something like a mammoth. It would take every man in your tribe just to kill one of these things. It's not like you could be an ivory hunter in 1900 with your high-powered rifles and go out and slaughter a whole herd of these things. And you were lucky to get one of these guys. And you could see Randall Carlson probably made the best case I've seen for the Younger Dryas event, involving some kind of extinction there. I know there's other views on how it might have happened, but uniquely North America lost a large proportion of its megafauna. I think it was like 70% in a short period of time, and it didn't happen the same way in Asia. And you actually had better, more mature, and denser hunting populations of humans in Asia. You had a much larger population of hunters in Asia, and it didn't happen the same way as it did over here.
And then the diversity in Africa, that says a lot too. They said that at one time here on the plains of America, the diversity was the same as it was in Africa. And there was something, and I said, I will never buy it. That something happened that for some reason, all those animals started to disappear. Had to be either do with a catastrophic. I'm like Carlson. I think there's more to it. I think that it makes perfectly good sense to me to have a comet of that size or an asteroid hit that Canadian shield with 2 feet of ice. If it was big enough, can you imagine the amount of heat that would create and the problems it would cause? And I do. I really agree with that guy. I think he's on something.
Yeah, I was disappointed. I really was picturing just really tremendous feasting and and really so much hunting, but yeah, I have to defer to you as a hunter, obviously, so I have been educated.
Well, it's more and more apparent that North America was settled with hide boats. It wasn't some people marching through this 3,000-mile corridor with giant glaciers on either side, and ended up in Montana. No, it was people traveling along the coast in skin boats from Asia and from Europe, and just the language groups that came out of Asia. I think it's 9 distinct language groups that were probably separated from long periods of time that came into North America, and they're in South America within 1,000 years of being in Alaska. So Brian Fagan, in his book in the 1990s, Out of Eden, pretty much demonstrated that the Americas were settled through coastal boating, which means that the progress of people inland, adapting from hunting semi-aquatic and aquatic mammals to going inland and then learning how to hunt these large terrestrial animals, it's going to be a learning curve. And it's a situation where you'd see population densities fluctuate from the coastal areas to the interior as much as you see it now, where you didn't have great populations of people in the very areas where these giant herds got wiped out, where it would just be a few people.
And you can also, one of the things I always thought was interesting is, like, thanks to Ron West and some of the stuff, the information he put out, and other places I've read about the Blackfeet Indians, they're, as far as I can remember, if I got the right, Ron West said that they came from the south and moved north. They didn't come down through the Bering Straits. They started south. And I also think it's kind of interesting that they're of all the Indian tribes, they're 80% of them are A positive. Yeah. All the other Indians, 90%, 99% of them are type O. Now, think about that. And then on top of that, they were the bug boys of the plains. They're the nastiest Indians there was for people being hostile. Maybe there's something to say about A positive blood. Maybe it's hostile too. I don't know.
There's even some Polynesian names in the Great Basin. And you read the story about the guy that killed the 2 game wardens.
Yeah.
And the areas they were hunting in, they had Polynesian names attached to some of these places. It could have been some Polynesian sailor that jumped ship in Chicago and became popular in Oregon or Nevada, but that's kind of a stretch. You'd have to have a hell of a personality.
I think we're going through the similar, there's a lot of differences, but think about Galileo and the bullshit he put up with because of the information during the day. This is the way it was. There was no other, we were going no further. This is the end result of all we know. Galileo fought that like crazy. So I'm like, I put it to the modern, and I got everybody on the bandwagon saying this is the way it was, and that's when I started calling bullshit on it. How many sheep there are in the world too.
Well, everybody that got here in historical times did it with boats or ships. And that everybody in prehistoric times got here by walking all the way around the world instead of hopping in a skin boat. And hell, the Irish invented skin boats. Yeah, if the Irish can invent something that's seaworthy and actually get out there and not die while they're doing it, then any race of people.
A coracle, is that right? Coracle? A little boat?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll tell you something I remember. I grew up in a town which is like really hippie, extremely hippie town, still today. It's just a little outpost of hippies. And so I knew this guy, and again, this is a parent of a friend of mine. I was always doing this, talking to the old people. He would talk about, like, in the Southwest, there's these, some skeletons and remains and stuff, and they've got holes in the heads. And the holes show that there's healing there. And so his theory on this was that, they've been doing brain surgery.
Yeah, they're brain surgeons, of course.
Right. So that's like the 20th century view. They're brain surgeons. Whereas, the Robert E. Howard point of view is like, these people were bashing each other on the head. And hey, they got pretty good with the herbs and with the little health care that these guys would live for a few weeks to show some healing. And hey, that is pretty impressive. But, you get a hole in your head because some guy put it there with a club, not because they were doing brain surgery.
In the extreme Southwest, for instance, the Mojave Indians, they used weapons that were very similar to Polynesian weapons.
Ooh, war clubs.
Many Polynesians made landfall in North America. It would be around there. You're talking, they had this short fighting club that was like a crude version of what the Polynesians made out of harder woods and even out of semi-precious stones down in New Zealand. Well, you just got done reading Mary Rawlinson's narrative about her captivity amongst the Wampanoag Indians, and every time she got out of line, one of them say, "We'll knock you on the head. We'll knock you on the head." And they all said it in English.
Yeah.
I think knocking people on the head is the one thing that English and Native Americans agreed, was like a go-to social tool.
But that's the mindset. The mindset, you see a skull with a hole in it and you think, oh, these people were performing advanced brain surgery.
What you can see in Inca remains is that people got hit in the head because that's what they fought with. They would fight with these stone flails, a stone on the end of this leather lariat that they would whip around and hit each other in the head with. And they also had made bronze. The Inca technology, the Chimu civilization that preceded them had bronze like 1,000 years, like 400 AD. They were a lot more advanced than other people in the Americas, and there's evidence to show that a Persian flotilla ended up hitting that at some point. There was an exodus from Persia, and there's genetic similarities in Andean Indians, New Zealanders, and Persians. But you could see trepanning was mainly something that was done to repair a hole in the head. So if one of these knuckleheads got a hole knocked in his head, the doctor, the shaman, would trim away the jagged flanges of bone that were poking into the brain.
Yeah, I give them credit absolutely for the medical care. They were probably,
But still.
yeah, they were probably doing some, like, they were probably had some antibiotics developed or some herbs, or, I mean, I'm sure they had,
Quinine.
Yeah, so if I had a hole in my head and I didn't have an ER, I would certainly die very rapidly. And so these guys were doing good first aid and healthcare. I definitely agree with that. But it's just the mindset, because Bob is saying, like, Galileo, got in trouble with the church. But today it's like the mindset that everybody wants to believe is that they would rather believe that people were doing brain surgery than believe that they were bashing each other on the heads.
Yeah, but Lynn, nowadays, aren't scientists the church?
That's right. Yeah, the universities, absolutely. Yeah.
It's coming from a rural boy and looking at the technology, and I was talking to James about this the other day. Our knowledge has exceeded our hearts. That's how I feel about this.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how I look at it. Because when we get back to, like, when we talk about hunting, I joke around about how delicious they are, but also you have somebody that hunts an animal enough, the respect and you can call it what you want, but the respect and love they have for those animals, they don't want to see them cease to exist. They want to keep hunting them.
This is what I want you to talk about. It was on my list because you as a hunter have taken all these lives and enjoyed these delicious animals, but you as a hunter understand these animals and love these animals much more than, I love animals, but I'm out here in the suburbs and I don't have that intimate connection. So if you talk about environmentalism, conservation, and you talk about how these animals have come back, a lot of them have come back from the brink of extinction, it's because of guys like you. It's not, it's not because of the suburban children who signed petitions or whatever.
Yeah, that's exactly.
If you don't hunt them and there's no value in them being hunted, then they're just going to be replaced by livestock, right?
The Pittman Act, remember that? Signed in the 1930s? That's when the animals started to come back. They started taxing us every time we bought a fishing pole, rifle, ammunition. There was a tax on it, and guess where that went? To open more land up and take care of those animals we'd slaughtered. One of the things that really irritated me when I was reading about some of my ancestors when they settled this valley, just like James says, the very first thing they did, killed all the bears. They get and kill. They even get in big drives and they'd annihilate every deer, elk, anything that would compete with their sheep and their cattle. They were gone.
That's the book of Genesis, bro.
And that's exactly what would happen here. And that was one thing when I read about my ancestors, it really disturbed me. I kind of had a hard time with that. Because once you start hunting and looking at it from that aspect and trying to, compared to what's been passed to the hunter-gatherers, I guess you'd call me a plastic hunter. I don't know. You know, I'm probably what's left of the few hunters that me and Shane were, my friend, were always meat hunters. We didn't care about trophies. We wanted the meat. We loved eating the meat. And, when you talk about how we look at that, when I eat that elk becomes part of me. And then, you know, I can see how the Indians would say we're one with everything. You actually are. Those atoms and all that stuff in the water gets getting recycled. When you partake of that elk becomes part of you. And that's how I'd look at it too.
What about, could you speak to the water situation in the West and the difference between cattle and bison?
Yeah, when James was, we were talking about cattle and bison, the buffalo was, you know, he was involved with this kind of area. The cattle need more water. They, don't do well as grazing. They are as effective grazers as buffalo. They're finding these things out now. And,
The cattle graze differently, and the grasses don't. They graze in a way that they tear up the grasses more, where the bison kind of nibble at it. And
yeah, I'd love to have, you know, if you can't do it, but compare two areas that were alike in buffalo and cattle. And I'll bet you could, like I said, the buffalo would sustain your ground 10 times longer than the cattle that were domestic.
Okay, so how much is the water requirement different between this cattle and the bison?
You know, I'm not real versed on it, but I always know that domestic animals generally need more water than wild animals.
And recently, my bodybuilding friend has been indoctrinating me into the keto religion. Apparently, bison is like the best meat that you could eat. It's better than all these other meats, and it's an animal that doesn't require commercial feed, and it's not maxing the water out. It doesn't make sense that more is not being done with this animal.
And that was the coolest thing about a buffalo. Had been on nothing but wild feed. The first thing I noticed when we started butchering this animal, the fat was yellowish orange, it wasn't white. And it was delicious. We cooked it, we'd leave the fat. The guy, he gave you buffalo, he says, do not trim the fat off of that like you do with elk and deer. He says, save that fat. That stuff is delicious. And it was.
it's incredibly valuable. It's the reason it is that color is because it's picking up the oil. There's actually a teeny tiny amount of oil in the grass, and the bison that are eating only wild grasses are concentrating that in their fat, and their fat actually has omega-3 like a wild fish, you know.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
everybody tells you to eat salmon, wild salmon, or because of the omega-3, and the reason that that beef doesn't have omega-3 is because they feed it stuff like cottonseed meal and corn and all that kind of stuff that doesn't have omega-3 oils in it, and therefore it's not going to be in the animal when you eat it. Whereas an animal that's grazed all its life has that really yellow color. And you see this if you find milk. You can now buy for extraordinarily expensive prices grass-fed milk and grass-fed butter, and it has that color, it has that golden color.
And there's one breed of cow I do remember that had fat like that, and that's a Jersey. And a lot of the guys would, I always thought it was odd, but the Jersey bull calves, instead of knocking them in the head like they did with the Holsteins, because they couldn't do nothing with them, they would pasture the Jerseys and slaughter them for eating beef because they tasted so good. And so the Jersey cow, I wonder if that was one of the first original breeds. I always wondered about that, the milk cows.
Okay, if it came from Jersey, it was either brought by the Dutch or the Swedes. Okay, because that's who the original cattle in the United States in the 1600s. The English didn't bring any cattle. All they brought was pigs. The Dutch and the Swedes brought cattle.
Yeah, and I didn't know that until James pointed that out. But yeah, I got thinking about it. And when you know, like in some of the old breeds, there's a cow here. It's called the Dutch Belted. They're a real pretty cow. They're smaller, but they were Dutch Belted. That's what they were called. And that's who brought them here. And I'd never thought about it until James mentioned it to me.
I wanted to ask you more about domestic animals, but first, before I forget, Could you explain to us what you hunters do with your clothes and everything between hunting seasons?
Yeah, especially when we bow hunted, it helps. You know, I mean, there's no way to totally cover up your scent, I don't think. Once they're downwind of you, I don't care what you're wearing, they're going to smell you. So what we'd do with our bow hunting clothes, we'd have a pair of clothes, be a t-shirt or a shirt to go over it, long sleeve, or pants, we'd even put our boxer underwear in there. We'd put them, pack them with sagebrush. We used to have a weed up here we call gumweed, really pungent.
Those little yellow flowers.
We'd pack that bag right full of the dried contents of it, and that's where we'd leave those clothes year round. As soon as we got done, we try to, wash them there's a kind of soap you can use that's non-offensive. What is it, James? You know what I mean? It don't have the flowery smell to it. It's just plain.
It's unscented.
Yeah, it's unscented soap. And we'd use that to wash our clothes to get our sweat out of it. But then we'd plop them right back in these bags and tie them up again and put them in storage until the next time we bow hunted.
Okay, yeah, the unscented soaps really rendered from fat. So, okay, so that wouldn't pollute it. But what's the first domestic animal that you worked with? Because you did work helping different people around the valley when you were a kid.
Well, we had a cow my dad used to milk, was a Jersey cow, and I was just a little kid, so I didn't deal with that much. But the first thing I dealt with was sheep, because my family, my grandfather, my father, before he worked in the mines, they were all sheep herders. So the first animal I dealt with was sheep.
A flock of sheep. What's it consist of? What kind of sheep?
They'll have I'm trying to remember what the ratio is, bucks to use, so they all get bred. And I'm honest with you, I've forgotten right at the moment. I don't know what it is. But what I used to do, one of the first things I learned from my dad is how to do the spring docking. And if you want to listen to something pretty entertaining on TED Talks with that Mike Rowe, listen to what he has to say about dealing with sheep and something he'd never seen before. And he was, he got it educated. When I was laughing when I was listening to it, because I knew that was exactly, we never used the lastators. We always used a knife.
So what is sheep docking?
What you do is you don't want a bunch of, you have to deal with the males, just like gelding horses or anything. You can't have a bunch of aggressive human beings, aggressive rams running around. So they'd either buy their breeding stock or they grow their own, and we would take all the inferior stuff and on the males and we'd castrate them. And then they'd go through they had what they called a smut face and a white face. All the smut face went to market. The white face used were what they were saving for the next generation. But all the smut face and the white face rams that we castrated, they went to market.
Okay, so docking is castrating. You're cutting
your
testicles.
You're putting an ear tag too on them, and if everybody, they've seen pictures. Lambs have long tail. They don't have that little short stubby tail. And a lot of times, my dad said it too. He says the feed they're on is so rich that he says it really actually helps them, keep them more sanitary to cut their tails off.
So to domesticate a herd of these sheep, you take all the inferior males and you emasculate them, right?
That's right.
So they don't breed. So kind of like using public schools to turn inferior males into soy boys and hipsters and hippies and stuff like that.
But the breeding stock's the most aggressive, the biggest, the strongest you can get, for all the qualities you want in that animal. So the bulls are meaty. There's not a lot of fat to them nowadays. And so, but they do. Anything that's inferior is castrated.
What's the ratio that you end up with when you're doing that? Because this is actually something I did want to talk with you about, James, just the whole civilization as a people farming thing, because you end up with, what's the ratio of male to female in a sheep herd or in a chicken coop, or, you need one male for a lot of females, right?
Generally, especially with, pheasants and chickens are a good example. Yeah, you can. I don't know what it was, but I imagine you'd have one rooster to easily 20 to 30 females.
And what is it with sheep?
That's like I was telling James. I can't remember, but I thought it was one, and I could look it up real quick. I got my iPad here, but sticks in my mind, deer they're similar to sheep, and you can get away with 5 males to 100 females, or, it's not real good, but if you're managing them, it's okay. In the wild, at sea, of course, they don't castrate them, so you've got almost an even amount of males and females sometimes. So, but yeah, in a sheep herd, your breeding stock would be same thing as if you're managing deer, or if you're growing something, it'd be, 1 or 2% of the population.
Now
would be in those sheep. And so I'd say 250, maybe 200. I'd have to look it up what one ram could service on the range when they put the rams in, what they use.
okay, so what does the behavior for the comparative wild animals like the deer and the elk, these other antlered critters, how do they group up? How do they organize themselves as far as gender goes?
They all hang together. The bulls all hang together, the bigger ones, and they call them bachelor herds. And they don't start splitting up until they start rutting, getting the urge to pass on their genetics. And then that's when you get the satellite bulls, we call them. And that would be the younger bulls that weren't mature enough to push the older bulls off the herd. And it depends. In some areas like here in Utah where we shot the crap out of, we didn't leave a lot of herd bulls, a cow could have sometimes I've seen as many as 60, 80 cows with one bull trying to take care of them, try to keep the spikes and the rag horns and the young bulls off their herd. And they would be huge amounts. Seeing a little bit in Wyoming, but a lot of times you'd see smaller. It'd be 20 instead of that many. It'd be like 20 to a bull. They saved a lot of their herd bulls, and you can only get so many tags in an area. So they had a much better system of regulating their game than Utah does. Utah's finally getting the idea, but the reason they're getting the idea is because there's getting to be so much money in private hunts on private property and the expense you can get for them. And so, they're realizing that brings in a lot more to the state than turning the rednecks loose every year to shoot a few meat deer.
What about, could you describe hauling any elk out of that canyon that you took me past the other day, just to give an example of how you recover the meat?
When we were young, we didn't use a lot of the horses until I started the guide, which horses are a godsend. If you're shooting a lot of animals, you couldn't do it. You couldn't be a guide and not have a horse, it'd kill you. Because a lot of times an elk would be 4 miles away from our highway when we'd kill them. And so we pack everything out, and we had what they called an Alaskan frame, a meat pack. And me and Shane both had one, and we quarter the animals up and try to get them out as fast as they could, especially during the bow hunt before they spoiled. And so you really worked hard to get an animal out. And just to give you an idea, a good sized bull, a hind quarter is 100 pounds.
One hind quarter?
One hind quarter is 100 pounds.
So you put 2 of them on this frame?
You put one, or if you're feeling good, if it was a smaller bull, I have packed 2. It about does you in. That's when I was in the 20s and 30s.
Jeez.
But two of the smaller would probably be a spike hind quarters. I could pack them, but I didn't like to. It was hard. One was about all, be like all he could handle at an extended time.
Okay, there's this myth that's gone around from anthropology that the hunter and gatherer was this scrawny, tiny little creature based on studies of people that survive on the margins, like the last wild people left around. But these are all people that are usually hunting small game, or they're in a desert and they're all ganging up on one animal, like in the Kalahari, or it's a group that's hunting in some place like the Philippines and they're hunting monkeys and stuff like that.
Pygmies that hunt in the forest.
Right, and they're dealing with small game, but from what you're describing to me, primitive hunters that would be hunting something like an auric or a red stag, strength would be a big asset just for hauling the meat.
Protein and fat, not carbs. Protein and fat are the order of the day when you're a hunter-gatherer. I imagine they threw some carbs in when they can get them, but majority of their diet was meat. And I'll quote from Magellan. I was reading reading some of Magellan's journals, and there's a part in there, and James knows what I'm talking about. I think he read something similar to it. But when Magellan was describing the hunter and gatherers down on the southern tip of Africa, he said they were 6 foot. They were big. They were bigger than the Europeans. Same thing. The same thing with the Sioux. Even today, if you'll go back into the Sioux reservations, those men are like Nordic. They're huge. They're 6'2", 6'4". They're big Indians. The Utes were never that tall. They were broad and wide. More like James said, they were built more like Polynesians.
Well, the Fugans was who he was talking about. And they named the one guy. He became a Christian, and he eventually died when they were halfway across the Pacific. And a lot of the sailors were dying from the same thing. It was probably scurvy. But yeah, they were just amazed by how big these Indians were.
Yeah.
You see the same story everywhere.
What did you say the average height of the European was in those days?
Their soldiers were like 5'5".
Yeah, think about that.
Whenever they run into Aborigine people, they're dealing with the people of the same stature of the Cro-Magnons, which was about 6 feet tall. 6 feet tall seems to be what you can get out of somebody that has a high protein diet from childhood up. So the most interesting stat was the combatants in the Zulu War in the 1870s. The British soldiers were 5'5" to 5'7". The British officers were 5'11", and the Zulus were 6 feet. So what you have is the British officer is living close to the diet of the primitive herding person. Okay, because the Zulus
had better access to the food.
Right. So it's all about protein.
He can afford the protein.
And if you're talking about industrial warfare, who won that? The Zulus didn't win. The British won. And to the Zulus, those little British soldiers were like lions. That's how they described them, like lions, because they didn't get tired. Probably because they're like 140 pounds.
Yeah,
squares,
they've been
right?
starved all their lives.
They didn't get tired. They didn't have to eat a lot. They were mean as shit. They had been picked on their whole life. So it's the malnourished European turns out to be like the perfect industrial soldier.
Yeah, and here's another thought I've had, man. It's like, think about it. You're starving people to death. You don't care. You're working to death, and the ages pass. It's like James written in his descriptions of how they treated the white children. They bring them in. They were from Aberdeen area, and some of the stories he said they were worked to death. Well, what happens if you have a few of them survive and pass on their genetics? Then you have a few of them survive and pass on their genetics, and have a few of them. They're smart. They may be little, but they're intelligent, and they're usually aggressive, and they're strong. And so maybe, that's the reason, they can say what they will about the white people. Maybe that's the reason we are.
Audie Murphy is the best example. Audie Murphy, he became a movie star. He was the most decorated combat infantryman in the American Army in World War II. And he was a poor kid that grew up as a squirrel hunter and in the South. And you'll find a lot of the guys that are most highly decorated U.S. infantrymen are actually little mixed Europeans, guys that are part Scot, Irish, English, Welsh, and they grew up relatively malnourished as subsistence hunters because a lot of the kids in those depressed areas in the late 1800s and early 1900s, they'd hunt small animals to help the family out. And these guys became excellent soldiers. Like Audie Murphy was one, and your friend Shane did it too. When he was 5 years old, he was hunting rabbits.
Yeah. We all started hunting at a very early age, as soon as we could shoot. I was killing things. I was killing rabbits like Shane was 6, 7, 8 years old. So we were hunting. We started hunting like it was just the way it was, a rite of passage in these rural areas. We never, we always had a fishing pole or a rifle in our hands. That's what we did. We didn't look at, we didn't have video games and stuff like that. We spent all our time outdoors, fishing or hunting or even working out there. So yeah, it was a totally different lifestyle than a lot of the people live nowadays in the suburban and the urban areas.
It's much different. Yeah.
Liberals don't like us either. That's the reason they want to make all that, they want to take away that electoral vote. Then they can tell us we're rural bastards right where to stick it, They can do anything they want.
They cannot comprehend a person like you, Bob. They just can't. It's like, honestly, I'm sorry to say it, but it's like you don't exist because you're just a nice person who's never harmed another person. You own, I don't know how many guns you own, dozens, I'm sure. And you've been shooting all your life. And you hunt animals, but you also love animals. I mean, you don't exist in in the liberal worldview. It's not important to talk about you.
And here's another example I can tell you the difference. First thing I noticed when I was talking to James, I mean, the majority of my fights I ever got in were defensive. Had nothing to do about going on the offensive. I only went on the offensive once. The other times it was self-defense. Somebody started a fight, and I had to deal with it.
Well, so talk about the one time you went on the offensive.
Well, I went on the offensive. We used to have a men's league just to get run us 20-year-old guys when we first married out of energy. I guess the wives probably loved that. So it didn't bother them at night. But I always just laugh about that. But yeah. We had a men's league. We'd play a doubleheader sometimes. We'd play baseball, and all the wives and all your children come over and watch these guys play fast pitch. And I had a kid. We were at a park there, and I had one of these young men. And this guy is probably he had to be close to 19 years old. And he was just torturing this 10-year-old kid in the sand pile and just being brutal to him. And my mother and I just happened to be sitting there, and I don't think this kid had any idea that was my mother. And my mother mentioned to the boy, she says, young man, why don't you leave that child alone? He says, you are a brute. You shouldn't be slapping a child around like that.
Vaginal authority.
And that kid turned around to my mother and says, you mind your business, you old bitch. Well, that was about the last word he had because
No.
I charged the guy, grabbed him around the neck, slammed him up against there was a telephone pole right there. I remember that a pole for the lights at night. I slammed him up against that. And I had my arm around his neck. I was choking him. I was just scared.
Job.
I said, don't you ever talk to my mother like that again. I'll finish this fight. And that's all I had to do. That's all I had to do with him. He melted it. He was just as big as I was. I mean,
You did him a favor, Bob. When I hear a story like this, I just think, that guy hopefully learned a lesson that day, and you did a good job teaching it to him.
Well, the thing too that worried me was I almost had a lawsuit over it. So we were first starting to get these first people in that, if you were the aggressor and they take you to court and sue you because the kid was 19 years old. If he was 18 or 19 years old and say you were past the age of 21, you were in a lot of trouble. It was just starting then. And I did have trouble with the mother over this. I had to talk to her and tell her what was going on. I said, I ain't backing down. I meant everything I said. And I said, this is what your child was doing. I got lucky, but she was upset. I barely missed a lawsuit on that one just because I never hurt him. I shook him up a little bit. That's it. I bent his pride a little bit. That's all I did to him. Physically, I hardly hurt him other than scaring the hell out of him.
Yeah, but you broke a major taboo in modern Western
and that's
society.
and that was starting. That was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, and that's when I really see things starting to change.
You did do him a favor too, because eventually he'd end up picking on some Mexican guy who would have gutted him.
Yeah.
Because
That's
the little guy's not going to beat him up.
Yeah.
If I got some big guy picking on me, that was my mentality. I stabbed people when I was a little squirt.
I told the story about James when we were working up in the oil field. I mean, the drugs were rampant. That's where meth really got going the hardest was these guys were working these ungodly shifts. I mean, I told you about when we were talking about the boot. I went on my blue collar vision quest because there was times when I went 3 days without sleep, but I would not use meth or any of the drugs or anything to try to do it. I would just try to do it natural. But that's where meth started. These guys were all on drugs. But the point I'm getting at, this gentleman that was working with us, he was into the drugs and extending his endurance chemically. So he was buying, there was a bar we used to have a beer at where we headed home sometimes and we'd stop at. It was called, if anybody's in the Wyoming, Evanston area, they know where Boomtown was. Well, a lot of the drug deals in the back parking lot, that's where a lot of the drug deals took place. And this gentleman that was working with me would just abuse, and it was Mexican guys that were passing these drugs, and he'd abuse the hell out of them. And I'd caution him. I says, you know, those guys are going to get tired of that one of these days, and you're going to have a problem. You're going to run into the wrong one, and you're going to have a problem. And it was really strange because I quit and went to work pouring cement out in another part of the state for a construction job, and I came home where we were actually at one of these ball games, and we were talking, and one of the guys that still worked in the oil field said, "Did you hear about Dennigan?" I go, "No. What happened to him?" He's in the Evanston Cemetery. I go, "What?" He says, "Yeah, you were right." He says, "A Mexican gutted him in the parking lot." And that's a fact. They dropped it. They cut him bad. His intestines came right out. And it was the same. I bet they used the same method as James describes, you know. Pulling up and twisting that knife and pushing down. I can see it in my head. Yeah, I'm using a knife. I can see how that would happen.
Yeah. Oh, that's one we have to talk about next time, whenever you and I do it, because yeah, not for this one, but yeah, talking about how many people you could kill in a in a crowded.
Or how to defend yourself with a butcher knife.
Yeah. But Bob, I want to get back to the hunt because we kind of left it. We were talking about how you had twice as many horses as men. You were out there using the glass or glassing, as you say, and it was probably the second or the third day. So tell us about, you know, a whole day goes by and you don't see an animal. How does that go?
Finally, my son and my son-in-law had my spot and scope, and I left that because with binoculars, I used them more up close. They actually spotted the few buffalo up on the mountain that we later went in and got. So thanks to them, we didn't, I mean, there's a lot of buffalo there, but we seen 2 buffalo, and that was it. And they spotted them, and that was the ones we had to concentrate on. And what's odd, you would always see these pictures of these buffalo being out on the plains and in the short grass, but the buffalo in the Henry Mountains are up as high as the elk. You hunt them just like elk. Once you push them up in that timber, it's like it is. It reminded me of hunting elk when I went out to these, because these buffalo my son and my son-in-law spotted were on a little ridge at about, I would say, 8,000 feet. When we looked at the map, when we was trying to decide how we got up to get up there to get access to them, because they were probably a good mile and a half. Well, they're probably 2-3 miles away when they spotted them.
Wow!
And they were a long way out.
So how did you access them? Did you leave the horses behind, or did you bring them home?
No, we took the horses. The guy I was with knew the area, and he says, "I know how to get in there, but it's going to be a long ride, so we're going to have to get up very early, and we're going to get back very late if we kill an animal." So we got up and left before light, and we was coming down right at dark with the buffalo. But it took us, and you know, a horse can travel pretty well. It took us 3 hours just to get to the buffalo one way, but it was uphill all the way. It took us 3 hours to get to where those buffalo were before I could even hunt them. And we had to use the horses.
So once you get there, how does the hunt progress?
All right, what we do, all the guys that sent me and another guy, and of course, I talked to James about it. I was, by that time, I had a knee replaced. I was looking at, that's about the time that I was really having a lot of problems. I broke my back on a horse when I was like 28. So as I got older, the vertebrae in I had been regressing. I mean, I was having problems. And, so I was right on the verge of a major surgery on my back when I was going on this hunt. So I was in bad shape. And so I talked to the guy that, the doctor that looks after me in my primary care. And he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll give you 12." And I can't remember what they were, if they were oxycodone or what they were. He says, because I told him what I was going to be doing. And I said, this is, I'm too old to be on the hill. This is going to kill me off. I need some help. And it's one of the few times I've ever used narcotics to hunt. So what I did, I took that 14-year-old kid and he packed my rifle. I wouldn't touch the rifle until we got right on the buffalo. Plus, the guy that I was hunting with was in the same shape I was. He'd worked a hard life too. We were laughing. He was in the construction business, and he He'd poured cement. He was hurting like me. We got on the horses. I'll never forget. We were saddling up. We had all these young kids with us. And he looked at me and he said, I'd rather be beat to death than get on this horse. It was on the third day, and I felt the same way. I was hurting. And so I said, here, this will help. And so I'd only taken a few of the narcotics that he'd given me. So I handed him 2 pills. I says, here, take these. This will help. And as we started riding up the hill, he kind of grinned and he reached down in the saddlebag and he had a pint of whiskey in there too. So we had a couple of shots of that too. On the way up. That was just to get us there, you know. But yeah, we didn't touch any alcohol until for 3 hours. We never did anything like that. But yeah, it was 3 or 4 hours before we got to the animal party. We got shooting. But yeah, that was the only time that's how like I said, we were getting to get up on the hill.
So how far were you away from the animal once you got there?
The wind, I think I was telling you, the wind was awful. There was a storm coming in, and we had. If you ever see a blizzard in some of those areas that are open, and then they got the hill, you know, the hills just pop up. It's nothing to have 50, 60 mile an hour winds, and we were experiencing something similar. It was a shot at 200 yards or 300 yards there's no way. I'm not good enough shot. I'm not a sniper. I wouldn't be able to figure out even the Kentucky windage you'd have to use to get the shot in there. So he said, I might get you 200 yards. And I said, we got to get closer than that with this wind. We got to get within 50 yards or less to get a good shot and kill that buffalo. I can't shoot this buffalo out in the open. And so he agreed. And so we watched these 2 buffalo feeding, and they finally got into an area where the wind wasn't blowing too much. And on top of that, it was really wooded. And it was like a little patch of timber right on the edge of this meadow where they'd been feeding. So what we did was come around on them, found out where the wind was. So we came in on a crosswind, and both of us have had years of still hunting. And we did. We got even closer. We got within 20 yards of that buffalo.
Tell me what still hunting is.
It's
You did it to me the other day.
Yeah, I did. I messed with James a little bit. That's another good story.
We had an airsoft war. The Harm City Hood Rat representative did not do very well.
What?
Yeah.
Nope.
Oh my goodness.
You know, one of the things you do when you're in a moving battle, you shoot and scoot. You don't want to have anybody.
Yeah, I was looking for the enemy, and then I lost my heart and lungs.
Oh.
And I finally, after about 2 games with my grandson, I said, this is bullshit. I can't keep up with these. Even James, I can't keep up with these guys. So I said, I'm going to hunt them just like I do an elk and a deer. So all I did is sat and waited and shot them as they come by. So I just took cover, and it was hard laying in that. Man, I have a hard time getting on the ground, but yeah, that's how I hunted. But that's basically what we did. You take a couple of steps, you listen, you look. You take a couple of steps, you listen, you look. It's boring as hell, but you do it irregular. When I say on your footsteps, you don't. You're
not marching.
You don't have a cadence to your walking and try to break that cadence up.
Right.
And because you'll notice if you get close enough to a herd of elk, I've sat by a herd of elk that were within probably 50 to 100 yards and sat with them all day when the wind was right. And they make a lot of noise when they're feeding. They crack branches, they make noise, but that's the thing, you know. They will hear that like a horse coming that has a cadence. The way you walk down the trail that has a cadence to your steps. You got to break that up. So that's what we do. We take irregular footsteps, 1 or 2. Next time we'd go 3 or 4. If we broke a branch, we'd set and wait.
So if they hear you, then they could mistake you for another animal.
That's right. That's why horses can get so close to them. They feed like that. They don't make a lot. They make noise, but they have that broken cadence. They don't have an irregular mechanical, motion to their bodies. The horses are feeding the same way. They feed a little bit, they move a little bit, and so yeah, the animals can actually tell. They have an idea what's out there when they hear those noises.
So you switched into this mode because you wanted to get closer.
Yes, and you have to have a lot of patience. It's really hard. I've tried to, like James has had the airsoft war with my grandson. It's really hard at his age to teach him how to hold still.
I get impatient and start looking control, and then I die.
And I told him, I says, the best hunters have a lot of patience, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
And they're in for the long term. They got a lot of endurance. They'll stay with it. They got patience, and they trust after they get enough experience. They trust what they've learned. I says, you cannot jump around like you do and expect they're going to hit you. And James can tell you, the kids.
Well, what do I get? First time I got killed, it was a headshot. Then it was a kidney. Then it was a foot and the kidney. Then it was the spine. Then it was the heart and the lung. Then it was the navel.
Wow, I'm happy to hear this. I had no idea you've been up to this stuff.
I got a grandson. He just, as you notice, when your kid's growing up, somebody can hit a baseball better than others. Somebody can throw harder. Somebody can run faster. Well, this grandkid of mine's got we've seen in other people when we lived here in the rural areas, he's got a gift. He's got a gift for being a rifleman. That kid's a hell of a shot at his age. He's better shot than some adults I know.
I had him dead to rights from 20 feet with a rifle, and I was just starting to squeeze the trigger, and he shot me in the throat with his pistol.
Oh my God! Ow. Is that paintballs? What is it?
Yeah, while he was moving, I was standing still with a brace. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
Wow. So okay, but I want to know how long it took you then. So did you got off your horse to approach, or what? Tell me, Bob, what happened next?
We probably followed that buffalo while they were feeding to get him in that position for probably a mile uphill, a half mile to 3/4 of a mile. We followed him.
How long would that take you? The way you were moving?
We probably, let's see, rode up. We probably got on him, started to stalk him by 9:30 because we'd rode in the dark most of the way up. And it was probably a 3-hour stalk to go that far. I bet we spent 2.5, 3 hours to go.
That's kind of excruciating to think
because
about.
there was a lot of open areas where we could move across a little bit quicker, but once we got in the timber where there's a lot of ground cover and broken branches and noise, you'd have to slow right down. So yeah, we covered probably a mile, half a mile in 2 or 3 hours. But we got right up on the feed, but we got right up on them. They were actually laying down, taking a time off before evening. And in fact, the guy I was with had to get the buffalo to jump up, so I didn't try to shoot at it laying down. And that was, so I got my first shot with the rifle, and I didn't even use my scope. I just shotgunned it. I just used the instinct. Didn't look through my scope because it was too close. So I just did an instinctive shot and put one right in the plums, first shot. And then it bolted, and it was downhill. And it was kind of, the shot wasn't quartering away. It was it's like when you look at a wall and you can see all the wall. Instead of looking straight on, you can see the wall and you can see the whole length of the wall, but it's at a really sharp angle. So the head and the butt are almost in the same spot. You see what I mean? So I didn't have much at that point, I didn't have much of a target. I mean, there was no more lung shots. I was in trouble and I knew it. But I said, I knew I had that one lung shot, but she was headed for a canyon, and I was almost sure she was going to die where I'd hit her. But she was going to go a long ways before she did. So the rest of my shots, I tried to hit her in the neck, which I finally did with the third shot. I hit her right behind the ear and broke her neck. But that was they were out there about 100 yards when I finally made that last shot.
Well, they have a huge neck though, right? They have like, a big hump there, which is the vertebrae that stretch up, and there's a lot of meat there, right?
Yeah, but yeah. I shot what I did. See, I had any sex, and I was a meat hunter again. I wasn't after a trophy, so what I shot was a young cow. So I could and that's what I come on to first, was a young cow. There wasn't just a cow and a calf is what we ran onto. And the calf was fairly large. The calf was almost as big as she was, so we knew there was a good chance she was dry. She wasn't nursing because the calf was very big too.
And is that preferable?
Pardon?
It's preferable for the cow to not be nursing?
Yes, if they have a calf and that's all they got at that age, and this calf looked like probably a yearling or more.
So
So
she's
yeah,
probably ready to go on its own.
she wasn't nursing this because when we got her down and rolled her over, she was still a fairly young cow, probably 3 or 4 year old. The guy guessed looking at her teeth, and he said probably hasn't had too many calves. This might have been her
Sorry.
first calf.
I
And
just
she
felt
was
a little solidarity with a cow.
Okay, so why don't you want a cow that's lactating?
Number one, they're feeding the calf. You don't want the calf to die, do you? You don't want to ruin that chance of that mother or that calf not replacing its mother. And and I've always heard guys tell me, I don't know if it's true, it's just a habit I had, that when we was meat hunting, we would always target females and young bulls and the young animals. We never targeted the big animals. We left them alone. But there was always I don't know, maybe an old wives' tale, but they said that the lactating female the meat was tougher, and so we would leave them alone.
Okay. So, if any Earth women are listening, if the big game hunters land from Alpha Centauri, they probably want to be nursing, right? They want to have a kid on the hip.
You liberals are in trouble.
Kids, right?
Well, that's the truth. We wouldn't, and the first reason was, like I said, if they're nursing, we don't want to shoot them. They're nursing they're nursing a young calf. We don't want to take them out and have that calf starve too. There's 2 dead animals, not 1. So that's a no-no to shoot an animal that's lactating. That was just the way it was. You never did that.
Smart. So then you have another animal to hunt next year.
The majority of the deer and elk I shot were 2 to 3, maybe the most. They're mostly 2 or 3 years old, maybe 4. That was the majority of the elk I shot in my life. The same way with deer. I did shoot a couple of really big deer, but I had one that was really weird. He had bad teeth, and he was one of the best tasting I ever ate. The other one was still pretty healthy, and he was nasty. I was like, the dog couldn't even hardly stand to eat the meat when you cook it.
Oh, wow.
And
so the cow went down, and you approached her, and what do you do? Are you on foot? Are you with the horses? What do you do now?
No, we're on foot. With horses, we're back tied up. They make too much noise. You can't have a horse on a stalk. They make too much noise. Their hooves and their steel hooves clicking in the rocks and that.
So the first thing you do,
you tie them up. You tie your horses up and go on foot.
Okay. So once you get to the animal that you're down, the bison, what's the first thing you do?
You look at it and go, oh my God, here we go. Here's the fun now. Here the fun actually ends right there because you know it's all going to be work. So the first thing we did, we started a fire because it was cold. We knew when you get that blood on your hands and you start doing that, you're going to get cold. You're going to sweat. You try to strip down even on a cold day because as soon as you start working on it, you get cold and sweaty. You get sweaty and hot anyway. And everybody knows if you're out a lot and you've got to stay out and you get sweaty and overheated, you're going to freeze to death. So that's the first thing we do. We start a fire and we strip down to where we can work the animal and have some movement. So that's the first thing we did. Then if the guys that carried, we didn't have a lot of food. So we were on the move and we didn't have lunches. I don't even think we packed the lunch. We just had, what we did was just apples and trail food, the granola, whatever we could find. Leftover, I think one guy had some leftover lamb chops in it, he had in the saddlebag. Anything just to snack on. And that's what we did. That's the first thing we did, to have a little energy. And then we started the job of taking care of dressing the buffalo and taking care of it. And what we did, the first thing we did, we skinned her. And we didn't gut her. The first thing we did not gut her. We skinned her with her guts in. And what we did, we laid. There wasn't a lot of snow, so the reason we did that, we had a platform for the meat to rest on, so we didn't get it dirty and filthy. So we laid that hide down. We laid it on that hide. And we laid it right in the middle of it when we started butchering. And then the first thing we did, some of these guys that's hunted will know what I mean. We Indian dressed the hindquarters instead of splitting them with an axe or a saw. We do what we call an Indian dress. So we took the front shoulders, the hindquarters off first. Of course, I cut the tongue out too because, never ate that. It's really good. So I cut the tongue out too. And then after that, we cut the loin out. We boned the loin out. And then we just started packing the meat up. We had game bags. We had the nice, my wife had sewed me up some beautiful game bags. They were, really good linen that. They were very washable. And, we started loading the buffalo in those linen bags to keep them clean. And so, the last thing we did was, I got to the head. I wanted to keep the skull, and a friend of mine that had spent most of the time with me hunting with the horses, he got the hide. I said, I'll just give you the hide. My wife, if I even try, she won't even let me keep, I have a few deer skulls. I do European style, mounting. And so I have a few deer skulls. I can't even put them in my house.
Oh, I love those.
Yeah, well, she's a modern woman. She she says it looks so awful if you go in the house and have all those dead animals looking at you. And I said, well, that's fine. It's your house. So they're down in my, James Wright, right. They're down in where James Wright. So.
Well, maybe you could snap some pictures and send them to Lynn just for a slideshow.
Yeah, I want those for the slideshow. All I can find around here, Bob, is rat skulls and squirrel skulls. I have a few of those.
My friend actually teased me. He says, I'm going to give Bob a gift for Christmas. He said, I'm going to tan that hide and I'm going to make sure it winds up on your bed. Like you're sleeping under buffalo over me.
Yeah.
How good is that?
I think it's great.
What did you leave on the ground when you were done, when you packed that?
We stripped every bit of piece of meat we could off of that. When we left, all was left was the rib cage, and we even cut some of the better meat off of that. So there wasn't much left. I cut all the neck meat off, because the neck meat is really good for making stews with. When we got done, there was the hooves where we cut off the lower part of their leg, left the hooves and a bit of the rib cage. That's all we left.
Okay.
And neck and skeleton.
So, what round did you use to shoot this animal?
I used, when I was hunting in Wyoming, we always carried the bigger rifles, the 300 Winchesters, 7 mags. And for buffalo, I would never shoot another buffalo with a 7 mag. I got lucky. I had my own hand loads, but I know the buffalo would have died, but as far as putting an animal down so it can't travel and giving a really quick kill other than a lung shot, you need a large caliber rifle. But I shot mine with a 7mm mag and a 175 grain bullet. The new Barnes bullet, it's out. The partition, like a partition on the nozzler bottom. That's what I shot it with.
If you shot another one, what round would you use?
I'd use the smallest thing I'd use would be a 338 with a 250 grain slug. That's what I would start with. I would never do it again with a smaller rifle. Just for as far as anchoring an animal. I mean, if you're going to lung shoot him and you got a long, big area you can see him run, lung shoot him, then, I don't know that, it bothers them that much. I mean, I know they experience pain, but here's something I have noticed. I shot a bull elk in the lung, mortally wounded. He sat around and wandered around like, what was that? He had no idea that he was stuck like that. I mean, that's when I was a bow hunter, that's the first thing I thought was so strange. They didn't even know they were hit. They'd start walking off and then all of a sudden they'd just drop. They'd just run out of steam. They'd never,
Well, James talked to so many stabbing victims that said something like that too, right?
Yeah, they didn't know they got stabbed.
In the same way, that's why we practice our marksmanship. You do not want to hit an animal you're going to eat in the shoulder and damage any meat. You always go for a lung shot or a neck shot if you're close. And I've shot a lot of, I've shot a lot of range a lot of animal down range. So yeah, we've learned, that's what we learned in life. Get close and neck shoot them, or if you can't get close, lung them and hope you can, you don't have to track them too far before you hope they die within sight, when they run out of juice. But
how much meat did your shot run with it?
None whatsoever, because I hit her right behind. I hit her just where the jaw comes down. I hit her about 2 inches back from her jaw, the bottom of her jaw. So it broke her. It hit her right in the neck, right at the base of the skull, and broke her spine. That was a kill shot. And the other one was within 2 or 3 inches, but it was a little lower, and it went through. It would cut some arteries and went through some meat, but it didn't anchor her. But the last shot broke her neck, and in fact, she was going so fast, and when I shot, I kind of lost her for just a second in the scope. And the kid was with me, said she did a somersault. She did an end over end when I hit her. So she was instantly dead.
Wow. That would be a sight to see. That's
Okay,
amazing.
so you're guiding. Well, why did you stop guiding at a certain point? Why did you stop?
I I'm not going to jump on the liberal band because they're wrong. But when they talk about, these guys, he couldn't stand hunting deer anymore, so he quit. The reason I quit guiding, I had no respect for the animal. All they were up there for was to get those antlers and leave. They didn't want, a lot of times they didn't even want the meat. I couldn't believe it. What we do, if they didn't want the meat, we take it, they process it, and we make lunch meat out of it. We do it the guy there would do salami and make bologna out of it, and we'd use it for lunch meat for the guides. So all they was worried about was the antlers. And the more I did it, the more pissed off it made me, and the more I couldn't. By the end, I didn't even want to guide anymore. I went about 12 years, and that's as much as I could take. I couldn't deal with it anymore. It was just so irritating to have guys like that with me.
So they didn't have any empathy for the animals.
No, the best hunts I went on was guys just like me, the guys that are welders and guys that are, I had one guy that got a lot of military guys actually. He'd been a pilot in Vietnam. And, he flew a A6, I think it was, an intruder. And he was the bait. He said, we used to do that wild weasel. And I was sometimes the bait. I was the one that they wanted to take a shot at with the guided missile so the other guys could hurry and find where it was shot from and destroy it. So he participated in that wild weasel. So he was like I said, one of the best hunters I ever went with. He was just about 6, 7 years older than me. They got along real well. And guess what? He was a meat hunter. He didn't want anything. He said, I'll shoot a cow, I'll shoot a spike. He says, but I'm a meat hunter, so what are we going to do? And I said, that's great. I said, I know how we're going to do this hunt. I already had it figured out. It says, I am so relieved. I can't stand guys that, all they want to do is kill for the antlers. Just the way I was raised. We were raised that, in this area, that was the wild game was part of your food storage, part of your diet. It would save money. We used to mix the pork and the elk together to make sausage. It extended the food you had. You just buy it, even if you bought it in the store. We'd always mix it with the wild game to extend it further. And so it was just part of your diet. It was like this normal. It was a normal thing for us to do.
The empathy issue. That's what the liberals don't want anybody hunting and don't want anybody owning guns. That's what they don't understand because they don't have any empathy for the animals either.
They don't have empathy for the people. Sorry, right. Maybe I'm overstepping, but
yeah, for nobody. They don't have any for anybody.
My father was the same way. He says, if you continue to hunt and you get to the point where you have no empathy you don't feel sorry when you kill that animal, you better quit because you're doing it wrong. That's how he left it with me.
We're losing power, Lynn. We've got maybe a minute or two.
Thank you for joining. That was episode 64, 65 of the Crackpot Podcast. Sorry, that's the end of the battery life. Thank you so much, Bob.
You're welcome.
got shit to do in outer space. Mother Earth can wait. We will take the ones worth saving. Pack your bags, we are vacating now. Forever, forever. There's a cosmic radio in my head, and it's reading news articles, and the correspondent sadly said the universe is flat. He also mentioned that gravity is caused by our cavities and our reflection of time's not a receding hairline, it's all mass produced in the back of our minds. Let's face it, there's some things that we will never know, and I don't ever want to know. And so it goes. Let's fuck it up, let us run amok, let's do the things that we want to do. We're animals after all. Out yonder, through the traffic and the people too.